Hello, good evening, and welcome to the Caithness Amateur Dram Antics Society. And this evening, I'm going to review from my home distillery, Wolfburn. I've seen maybe one or two of my videos of Wolfburn releases. So recently had a fairly significant birthday, and my brother very kindly gifted me the latest release from the Wolfburn distillery, the Wolfburn small batch release number 416. It's an age statement. The first age statement in the small batch release is 10-year-old, bottle at 46% ABV. And it comes in a nice box, nice colouring, to match, I think, the colouring of the whiskey inside, which is fully matured in for 10 years in port pipe casks. So there's the bottle, there's the box. It says in the box, handcrafted, natural colour, and non-chill filtered. And it's got some information in the box regarding the distillery and some tasting notes and a little bit about how they matured the whiskey. And then what a lovely colour. I'm going to open the bottle. My brother promised me a sample, but he's not been able to deliver it to me in time for this review, so I'm going to have to open my bottle. Getting a bit worried about oxidization of some of the open bottles I have. I do have an inert gas that I put in, used for wine tastings. But I'm going to pour a little bit of this to let it sit while I do a little bit of talking. And on the bottle, as we know, it's important that it says non-chill filtered and natural colour, and it does say that in the bottle. So I'll tell you a bit more about this one as we get into the tasting, but just a little bit about Wolfburn to refresh our memories about production. So the water comes from a small burn, a stream, for those of you unfamiliar with the Scottish term burn, and that runs beside the distillery. And I can remember playing in that burn. I remember playing where the old distillery was back in the day. You'll not find it now unless you know exactly where it was, or get a local person to Thurso to take you to it. So they draw their water from the burn, the Wolfburn, which also serves as the water source for the distillery, the Wolfburn. And they have two pot stills, and it produces about 125 litres of whiskey per year. And it does rely heavily on manual labour. The only computer in production is connected to the mash tun and regulates its temperature. Otherwise, everything at Wolfburn is done by hand. The two stills at Wolfburn are from the Scottish company Forsyths. All the equipment for distilling in the distillery is from Forsyths except for the water tanks, which are the old washbacks from the now closed lost distillery of Caperdonich in Speyside. The wash still is filled with 5,500 litres, although its theoretical capacity would be higher, and the spirit still holds 3,500 litres. Both are relatively wide and rather low, although the spirit still has a slightly different shape. It has a reflux bowl for extra copper contact, which should result in a classic, light, fruity North Highland whisky. And we're going to find out about Wolfburn's new make spirit, because I do have a small sample of the new make spirit here. So 9,000 litres of water mixed with 1.1 tonnes of malt grist in the semi-lauter mash tun. And starch and sugar are washed out of the mixture in 3 mashing processes, a procedure that takes a total of 6 hours. And then 10 months of the year, Wolfburn produces an unpeated mash, and 2 months a slightly smoky mash with about 10 parts per million. And I think the one we're going to taste tonight is from the unpeated mash. So the 4 washbacks with a capacity over halfway with 5,100 litres. And this way the foam does not rise to the very top of the washbacks during fermentation and they cannot overflow. To get the fermentation started, a special South African yeast is added to the washbacks, and the very long fermentation time is between 76 and 90 hours, and the resulting beer is therefore very light, fruity and floral. So for storage and bottling, Wolfburn has 4 warehouses known as dunnage warehouses, and try and keep that in mind because in a moment I'm going to explain why this is called, this rare batch release is number 416, to give you an idea of the number, what the numbers mean. So they have 4 warehouses, dunnage warehouses with clay floors and low ceilings, under which only a maximum of 3 casks are stacked. In 2021, planning began for a further warehouse, probably to allow whiskies to mature longer for older bottlings in the future. And as with the rest of production, there's a lot of manual work in the warehouses. The casks, for example, are labelled by hand instead of being barcoded. Among them are many bourbon casks, hogsheads, and classics like sherry and, as tonight, port casks, or sometimes Madeira casks. And unlike most distilleries, Wolfburn even has its own bottling plant, where bottling and labelling is done by the team themselves. So first of all, I'm going to try Wolfburn New Make Spirit, which I've been very fortunate to get a sample of. And let's see, 69.7% ABV. And as you would expect from New Make Spirit, it's sweet and a little dirty, oily even. And there's sense of wet hay and fallen leaves in autumn. Slightly salty and pretty heavy and thick. Some lemon in the background, but quite earthy. I'll try the palate. I'm only going to have a little sip of this because this is 69.7% ABV. And it's a little sharp, but not as sharp as you'd expect from a spirit at nearly 70% ABV. And you get lemon, alcohol obviously, and it's earthy and there's even some lime. And it's very dry with a slightly acidic, milky edge, sweet, and the alcohol becomes more prominent the longer it stays in the mouth. And the finish is quite long with hints of lemon and milk, earthy, sweet, slightly cloying fruit, and a spirity note of alcohol. I'm going to add 4 mils to this to take it down under 50% to see what we get. So yeah, it's a very pleasant New Make Spirit. Not as fruity as Old Pulteney, its neighbour on in the Northern Highlands. And with water you get some fruit sugar and it becomes fruitier and sweeter and malty, and there's lots of sweet cookie dough. It's somewhat oily and shows spearmint like sharpness, and freshness. It's got some muscles and heaviness, yet still sporting an athletic body. So this is the DNA of Wolfburn, and it's interesting to see what becomes of it after 10 years in port pipes, full maturation in port pipes. And with water, it's sweet, sugary bites, powerful, malty and creamy, and yet pine and spearmint. And the finish is warm, sweet, and mint. So the earthy tones and lemon appeal to me, since I like those sort of elements. And I'm glad that the vanilla is not the supreme ruler of this soon to be whiskey. And it's interesting that drinks of this strength can be so smooth. I've tasted spirits that instantly turn your tongue to leather and make the inside of your cheeks look like the cliffs of Dover. But this doesn't do that. It's a gentle spirit and smooth. I was surprised to notice some of that mint spiciness there. So I'm just going to have a drink of water. I've kept a bit of the new make back just to make a comparison with that to the whiskey I'm about to try. So, sit in my glass for a few minutes. We've had the Wolfburn small batch release, number 416, 10-year-old at 46% ABV. And the release 416, it's not a marketing number. Rather, think of it as an address. And that address is Warehouse 4, Stowe 16. That's the precise location in the warehouses in Wolfburn Distillery in Thurso, where this distillery has been resting in first fill ruby port pipes from the Portugal's Douro Valley for the past 10 years. So the name 416 is a map reference. If you visit Wolfburn, you can stand in the exact spot where it was stored, and they sampled it, deemed it worthy of bottling, labelled it, sampled it again just to make sure, and they produced 3,900 bottles, of which I have one given to me by my brother for my birthday. And there'll be no second run of this. This is a one-off limited edition. 10-year-old single malt Scotch whisky, bottled at 46%, fully matured in first fill ruby port pipes, sourced from a vineyard in Portugal's Douro Valley, which is one of the world's oldest protected wine regions. And it's the first age-stated expression in the Wolfburn small batch series. Non-chill filtered as always, no added colour as always. So a port pipe is a large Spanish oak cask, which typically holds around 550 litres, used to mature port wine in the Douro Valley before being repurposed for whisky maturation. And first fill means the cask has never really previously had whisky. So this is a first fill of whisky into this port pipes. And they come straight from the winery in Douro Valley, and they're saturated with the flavour compounds of the port it carried, which in this case was ruby port, which is the youngest, freshest style, deeply coloured, concentrated dark sherry, raisin and plum character ports. And when a first fill ruby port pipe is filled with new make Scotch whisky, those compounds transfer into the spirit slowly and generously. The wood breathes and contracts through the Caithness seasons, and the port's character melds and becomes part of the whisky's character. A sort of hola meets Yes, ken yourself. So, and the first thing you notice with this one is the whiskey's deep, rich colour, which is almost a match for the colouring of the box. Bronze or antique copper are the best way to describe the whiskey's colour. And along the side of the glass, there's some really thick, slow moving legs. Really viscous. So let's see. And those tears produce a creamy nose. And it's wonderfully expressive aromatically. There's well pronounced notes of blackcurrant and cherry jam. And that's followed by raisins, sweet dates, and a hint of vanilla. And you get that signature Thurzo touch. A salty sea breeze that drifts in at the tail end. And warm, ruby port leads the way. Dried fruits build gently. Raisins, dark cherries, and sultanas, wrapped in a slightly vinous sweetness. And underneath it all, a subtle coastal note reminds you where this whiskey comes from. Let's try them out. And it's impressively smooth. You do get a bit of brine, but it's sweet. And there's a gentle prickle of pepper. It's lusciously creamy. And after a few seconds, it reveals clear cherry notes. Chocolate covered cherries and vanilla with caramel. And it's surprisingly creamy for a port cask whiskey. Caramel and soft vanilla lay the groundwork. Then the port influence grows more pronounced. Dried figs, dates, and dark berries. And that lends the whiskey a full, almost dessert-like richness. And it all stays beautifully balanced thanks to a touch of oak and the faintest wisp of smoke, probably from the casks, barely there. Caramel, vanilla, soft and rounded, before the deeper layers arrive. Wine-soaked richness, dates, figs, a touch of oak, and a gentle thread of that smokiness. It's full-bodied, slightly oily, with a texture that feels deliberate rather than heavy. And the finish is long and warming. Dried fruits and port sweetness linger, balanced by a quiet freshness that keeps everything in place. The peppery note becomes more defined and the port influence takes centre stage. Think bold cherries and dates. And just before the curtain falls, there's one last hug from that maritime note, and then it's gone. Nothing rushes, Nothing fades too quickly. So I'm going to add 2 mils of water to this one. And rather than my pipette, I'm just going to put it from the container. And there's a lovely symmetry in this one. And with water, there's warm ruby port and sea salt on the nose, raisins and dark cherries building behind. Dark cherries and sultanas with wine-led influence. Try them out. And caramel and smooth vanilla rye first, followed by the wine-soaked depth of a decade in that first spill port cask. And then you get dates and figs on a gentle oak smoke. Caramel, soft vanilla, gentle oak smoke, dates and figs. And the finish is long, warming, and port soaked with the kind of staying power that makes you put the glass down slowly with caramel and ruby port notes. And that has become this. This is the new mixed spirit. This is the fully port matured cask whiskey. And you can get the DNA in the 10-year-old port cask matured, but it's a wonderful development, a wonderful maturation. And where some port finish whiskies lean heavily into sweetness, Wolfburn's number 416 showcases character first. The port sweetness is present, but it doesn't drown out Wolfburn's house style. It's balanced, juggling sweetness, salinity, and a peppery kick. And I think the decade of maturation serves it well. And it makes for a strong debut age statement in the small batch release series. I think it's probably one of the best port cask finished matured whiskies, Scotch whiskies I've had. It is, however, a whisky for those who enjoy pronounced cherry notes. If that's not your thing, this may not be the whisky for you, but for me, I think it's a cracker. Thank you for listening.